Greetings and hello, everybody. This is Don Taylor with PLP Pathways, and this is our 9th webinar of the year. This afternoon, we're going to be talking about how students, teachers, and teams are ending the year and transitioning to their next life and learning stage. When we talk about the personal learning framework, we're looking at the transformation phase and how we're bringing it all together and making sure that families and students are experiencing opportunities in an equitable and fair way as we kind of reach the end of our 2018-2019 campaign. PLP Pathways is supported by the Middle Grades Collaborative and the Tarrant Institute for Innovative Education. You can watch live now, or you can visit our YouTube channel to see more of the work that we've been doing around personalized learning in the state of Vermont. Our collaborators and contributors will introduce themselves, and then we'll start the discussion.
Hi, I'm Meg O'Donnell. I teach on the Alpha team at Shelburne Community School.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Wallman. I am Program Director at Up for Learning.
Hi, I'm Kevin Pioli-Hunt. I teach on Swift House at Wilson Central School.
And for us at PLP Pathways, this is kind of an exciting time of the year. We're able to look back on a lot of work that we've been doing. We usually have 10 webinars. This is our 9th one. And today what we'd like to talk about is supporting students as they transition to their next life and learning stage. For some of us, that means students are moving to the high school. For others, it means that students are moving into another grade in the same building. For some of us, that means they're staying on our team and they're just advancing through the grades. Our goal is to identify what teachers and teams are doing to bring the school year to a meaningful end, and also some of the academic, social, and celebratory structures that are in place to help students navigate the transition. And I'd like our panelists maybe just to talk about what's going on with their schools or their organizations, and how do you sort of recognize what's happening with kids socially, emotionally, and how are you implementing that knowledge into what's going on in your classroom as we head into the end of May and early June. And why don't we start with Meg and then Lindsay and Kevin?
Sure, thanks, Don. So on Alpha, we have a lot of transitions that traditions, that we have been focusing on, I think, since the team began. The idea of celebrating community, celebrating our year together. So we, right now, if you were to walk on Alpha, you'd have kids planning the final camping trip. So kids would be in trip committees for that. Kids would be, the 8th graders are planning their finale projects, which are sort of like a celebration of who they are as learners. And these events happen, the finale night for 8th graders, they rehearse celebrating these projects, sharing these projects with the team of the 6th and 7th graders as a rehearsal. And then there's a night where they present these projects and who they are, how do they demonstrate these characteristics throughout their life. They come up with some way to manifest this identity, and then they present it to their parents. And so it's a pretty big deal for them. They're nervous, but it's kind of this rite of passage. They've seen 2 previous 8th grade groups celebrate, and create these projects. So they've got that going on, as well as the camping trip, which is a big deal. We go away for 3 days and 2 nights, and it's all student run. So kids are planning meals and planning activities and creating a quilt and selling raffle tickets and fundraising, doing PR, getting the tent groups and cabin groups together. So there's a lot of activity around that. And we're also in our economics and ecology theme. So our kids are trying to come up with ways to improve our systems at our school related to reducing, reusing, and recycling, and SPECs.
Yeah,
So
right.
there's just one lens of the chaos in May. That is May.
I can go next. So I'll first talk about my current position, and then when I was wrapping up my my time at schools as of last year. So currently with Up for Learning, we're wrapping up a lot of our programming with schools across Vermont. And today I just actually came right from wrapping up a full year of working with, this was a cohort of 7 schools comprised of youth and adult teams from middle schools and high schools around the state. And they were looking at youth and adult partnership with restorative practices. And we had our final retreat today, and it was really great to wrap up. We had 5 retreats throughout the year, and this was our 5th. And it's been really powerful to be able to create this community of learners together. And one of the ways that we wrapped up today was some self-love. We often give a lot of appreciations to others. We did that too. We did some appreciation to members of their team, but then we did a letter to self, and thinking about just some of the major takeaways from this year and learning and growth, and some things that they really want to remember about themselves and what's really important to them. And I will send that to them the week before school starts in August. And so they wrote letters to themselves, the youth and adults. And I think that's a really great piece. Just like as you're wrapping up, what I want to remind myself about, like, who I am. And then like looking back, even like 3 months later, like, oh my gosh, that's what I was thinking at the end of 7th grade or 9th grade or whatever it is. Or as an adult, this is what I was thinking at the end of that year. So that's kind of how a lot of my programs are wrapping right now as the school year is wrapping. But then for me, as Meg was reflecting on all of her end of the year traditions, when I was working with my learners with the Edge Academy, we had a lot of pieces that kept us really motivated and excited in those last couple months of school. So we had, in the early part of May, we would always take our kids, similar to Meg, but we went to Holbert Outdoor Center every year in Fairleigh, Vermont for 3 days, 2 nights. And even though we were multi-age, and it was like, and sometimes folks think about like, oh, that's the kind of trip I would want to take in the beginning of a school year to build a team. But this was like the culminating thing. We like live for this trip every year to be together as a, kind of family unit and celebrate one another in a different way, and get out of the school setting and be outside and just be in a different space with one another. So we would always do that. We also always had an annual bike ride, and we at the time we had some folks that were doing some had a bike shop within the school at different points, and they would repair bikes for kids that maybe didn't have access. And if for those that didn't want to ride or didn't know how to ride, they would do a walk. But we'd all end up at a park and have a picnic where we celebrated our 8th graders who were leaving our team and moving on to the high school. And then finally, the big piece was our project fair, these year-long projects that our kids were working on. They had a daytime project fair where they presented to different peers within the school community and younger grades and parents and community partners. And then we had an evening potluck for families where people came after school hours to share a meal together. And also there was performances during that time as part of their projects, and also sharing of learning.
Cool.
Awesome. Kevin?
Yeah, so I have, similar to both Meg and Lindsay, Swift House, we have some traditions that we value and take on every year, kind of going in order from what we're doing. The first week of June, we're taking about 65 kids to DC for the week. And that's all part of, they've been working on independent projects, and they study something that's related to a DC topic. And our 8th graders who have been doing an 8th grade challenge have to interview somebody that's a professional in their field that they've been researching, and they get to have a formal interview while they're down there. The students who stay here, which are called home teams, so it's an option for kids to go or not. They also go on many field trips locally, and again have that experience of just getting out in the field and our eighth graders that stay on home team also get that interview experience. And that builds up to kind of our next piece where we wrap up academically. Our last week of school, we have our eighth graders have to do a 10-minute formal presentation to community panelists. So we have our 4 classrooms set up with about 4 to 6 community panelists in there, and our eighth graders give their presentation and get feedback. And we have a big luncheon with the panelists and the eighth graders to wrap up. And that evening we have an open house, which is similar to the kind of potluck idea that Lindsay was saying, where all of our 5th through 8th graders present their projects that they've been working on their independent projects in an open house format, where people can kind of come around. They give a little, 3 to 5 minute presentation with their trifolds about what they've been researching. And that's kind of our culminating academic piece there. The more on the social emotional side, and I know Donnie had mentioned not everybody's transitioning to high school, and obviously on a 5-8 team we have 3 years worth of students coming back to us the next year. We do a core placement letter on our last day. So students write all their core teachers. So that's like our advisory. That's what we call core. They write us a letter about their strengths and challenges as a student, who they would like to have for a core teacher the following year, because they have some choice with that, what friends they would like to work with. And we ask them if they'd like to be a mentor to new 5th graders coming in. And we ask them to really take some time and think about it and justify the different things that they're saying. And we then sit as a team. So the 4 of us and 5 with our special educator sit as a team and look through every single one of their letters. And that's how we start making next year's core placement and draft up our mentor-mentee pairs. So we really value their feedback and try to honor what changes they would like, if any. And then again, more as for the fun side, we do a big end of the year trip to the sandbar for a cookout. That's kind of our last go with the 8th graders. That's, their last day with us is Thursday before their 8th grade graduation. So we go as a team to the sandbar, and then when we come back, we have 8th grade superlatives that the kids make for them, and we just watch like a slideshow of kind of just pictures of the 8th graders throughout the years, which is really neat. Brings on a lot of tears for them too, which they don't want to admit, but they're all bawling by the end of it.
That sounds awesome. That's interesting. I hear a lot of tradition in there. I hear a lot of sort of some rituals too. And at our school, it's a little bit different because the 8th graders run a program called Crafters Edge, which is sort of an in-school business. They're the ones who have run craft fairs, and they just did a dinner theater production. And so they take a part of the proceeds and they take a big class trip, which is a big deal. And then they also have a foreign language trip where they go up for 3 days to Canada, and they spend 3 days in Canada. And that's a big bonding experience for a lot of the 8th graders. This year, and then on our team, we traditionally, I think for 12 or 13 years, we have a big breakfast for the 8th graders where the 7th graders make breakfast for the 8th graders. And then they make these cards, celebrating the unique aspects of each of the 8th graders. And so those traditions are, you get wound up. One of the things that I'm kind of reminded of consistently working with young adolescents is how what a powder keg the end of the school year can be too, with a lot of the emotions and a lot of the uncertainty for kids going into summer or kids going into high school. There can be a lot of fragility, and there can be a lot of intense emotional experiences with kids, and especially because we are getting towards the end of the year, how important it is to be calm and how important it is to be really sort of relaxed and provide a safe and structured environment for all kids. Because it can get a little hectic at the end of the year. So that's something I think about our learning environment. And then I took Sam Nelson's idea. He was on the webinar about two months ago, and he had this game of life. And I've created a big website where kids are learning about different aspects, career exploration. We're looking at investing. We're looking at educational opportunities across Vermont. And one of the things that we're actually doing is we're looking at the flexible pathways opportunities at the high school. So we're able to kind of go onto the high school's website and see the different learning opportunities that they have. And then the other thing that we're doing a lot of is we're building up our PLPs. We just got the statement from the high school about the critical elements that they want to see in their PLPs, which align with what we've been doing. So a lot of the work that we're doing now is having kids finalize their PLP, and and develop the evidence that shows how they have grown over the course of the 2 years on our team. And just one last thing too is I keep, reflection has been woven into so much of what we do and what we think about. I know Lindsay was talking about this self-reflection and how important that reflection can be. And so I'm having kids reflect, on how they've done on a daily basis. I'm having them think about how they're doing weekly or trimester, just a lot of different ways of having kids reflect on how they've changed over the course of the year, over the course of the 2 years, and having that be sort of meaningful so that kids can really see how they've grown and what challenges and strengths they're going to bring to their next life and learning stage. So it's definitely an exciting time of the year. But as we mentioned at the onset, it can also be, really fraught with sort of time of the year too, a lot of emotions. And I think kids start to realize that they're moving on. And when that happens, it's just a lot going on. Meg, you talked about or wanted to talk about planning for the transition. Could you go into that, please?
You mean for planning for transition into high school?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so similar to Kev, only, well, now that we have a 6th grade group, 2 7th grade groups, and an 8th grade group. So only a fourth of our team is moving on, at least for this year, but we're also in the middle of transitioning into a different structure for next year. So one of the things that's been interesting is that all of us are feeling this sense of a transition of this, this big change that's coming. And so I guess just thinking out loud, one of the things that I'm mindful of is as much as we're anticipating this impending, this change, I feel like it's also really important to just keep the norms that you have going on your daily basis, keep the expectations the same. Yep, we're in our writer's notebook right now. Yeah, we're going to write for, 7 minutes. Yes, you still are accountable to these targets. Not that it's about losing sight of the social and emotional and the celebration of things, but that we also need to hold school. I don't know how to say it, but just to hold school as as we have a purpose here. We have work to do. We have jobs that we need to do. We're accountable to each other if we have a group project or we have personal, we have our personal goals. We have our PLPs, even if they're in different stages of completion. We still have academic goals that we're working on. So I guess in terms of that academic component, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy. And then also have, a lot of times we'll just have a writer's notebook prompt about something about, transitioning to the next steps. What is something that you're looking forward to? What is it? A big part of the 8th grade finale project is, not just what are your characteristics, but where did you get them from? Did it come from a person? Did it come from an experience? Because those are the things that are going to inform your next steps up at high school. That's going to inform your future. So, you didn't become a generous person just by happenstance. You demonstrate that on a regular basis, or those are the foundations for what's next for you. So reinforcing, I think, for kids that, they're ready for the next steps. They're ready to move on. They have the capacity for those transitions. I know there's some formal things that happen for CVU, for us, for kids that go to CVU, obviously CVU that started in January. They come over and they talk to the kids, and kids already know what house they're going into. So if you're going to CVU, you have a sense of okay, I'm going to be in this house, and I know other Alpha kids or other kids in my neighborhood that have gone through there. If you're going to Rice or a different high school, that might feel a little bit more, they might feel a little bit more angst about that, but trying to connect those experiences so that they feel a little bit more like it's it's not just imaginary, but it's real. CVU has a summer camp for any ninth grade student going into ninth grade, so that they can come to CVU and have an experience. I don't have all the details about what they do for that camp, but I feel like the high school and the sending schools try to do a lot of communication around, what do we need to know about these kids to make this transition as smooth and as easy for them as possible. So that's one.
Can I ask a follow-up question? And this is to everybody, but Meg and maybe Lindsay too, because Lindsay, you're going out and seeing a lot of different schools. What are folks doing to communicate to the parents? How does that work? Or, when Meg, you mentioned this camp, like how do all the families know about the camp, and how are you aware of how it's being communicated, or is that something that's happening at the high school level?
Yeah, well, I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, we are made aware of it through our guidance counselor, and then our kids are made aware of it at the CVU 8th grade meeting, and then CVU hosts an evening for parents and their 8th graders. So that helps to communicate that. But a lot of times we have conversations at our March conference or April whenever our conferences are with our 8th grade families in particular. And we just talk about the fact that, you've got, 10 weeks when we come back from April break, and that time flies, and we think we have all this time, but there's a lot of events happening. Here's some information about CVU. Here's some information about, you've already been to the CVU night. How do you want to end the year strong? What do you want to be really intentional about over the next couple of weeks? So there's lots of conversations with families at conferences. And I know that, guidance and EST plans, and there's just a lot of communication around that. I don't know, Kev, do you do it differently?
Well, no, that all rings true for us. So I was just going to piggyback and say, I think our district, especially, I know a lot of districts in the state have taken on the social media much more with, posting on Instagram and Facebook and keeping updates that way. And I know specifically in our school, I think most ascending schools to CVU have their own newsletter. Like ours is, the Wilson School Bell, and that information is always put out to families. On Swift House, we have our own weekly blog that we send to our parents, and we'll put in that information from CVU in there, specific for our 8th graders. But it's, that I feel like that's, like Meg said, I think the conferences are obviously where you really get, the details to the parents and have the conversation about it, because we never know who's actually reading those emails or who's reading the board posts or the flyers. But that is, like, I think the secondary method of, the district sending out some things in social media and just posting on whatever other method you have of communicating in your school.
Right.
Lindsay, what are some of the things that you see? Oh, I don't know if Lindsay can.
Yeah, I can hear.
Oh, sorry.
I couldn't find my little button to.
Right.
I think it's all the same, and from my experience, I would just echo what Meg and Kevin just shared around communication. They're the same. Like when I was most schools start their transition into high school early in the winter, because there's a lot of steps that goes into that. But things that are available, like I know at my old school, there was an opportunity for kids who were maybe feeling like they wanted to develop some more connections before they started school, similar to what Meg was saying around the camp, but they did like a long trail backpacking trip, and so like when I knew that there was students that were feeling anxious, particularly about the transition, or maybe they were the first in their family to enter into the high school, or they were the only one that was going to be entering into the high school, depending on how many children were in a family. I would often call their family and talk with them about this opportunity. So, it's a huge transition, both into middle school, which we haven't talked about, but going into the high school, they're both really, really big transitions. And I think that there's a lot that goes on around like transition into high school, because I know it sounds like CVU does that. When I was in Essex, there was all sorts of assemblies and meetings and orientations and meeting with the guidance counselor and these other opportunities to start feeling connected to a larger school community. I think where sometimes maybe we miss the mark is that transition from elementary school into the middle school. And sometimes, from talking with students in past years, it can be really, really hard for kids to transition into middle school. There's just this I think sometimes the adults just make a lot of assumptions about what they know or what they're ready for. And I think we need to really be aware of our assumptions and checking those, and take a lot more time and be much more compassionate about the transition to middle school.
So Lindsay, the next part of our webinar is focusing on innovating the transition, what we could do better. Do you want to start talking about that with Kevin?
Sure. Well, I think we started to talk about it a little bit, but I'm curious about I know in past webinars, Kevin, you've talked a lot about I love that you all do like a meeting in the summer. Is it the summer before school starts with new Swift students?
Yeah, our hopes and dreams.
Yeah, I think that's like such a great to the transition piece into middle school. Do you find, I'm just curious, like what percentage of all of your new families come in for their hopes and dreams conferences?
It's close to 100.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I was curious.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Kev, can you talk just for a second about like how do you reach out? How does that, or maybe link some resources that you guys put in place for the structures for that? Because a lot of times we struggle with just access, right? Like how do we tap into families that maybe don't have email? How do we get them to the table? Do you do it just before school starts, or is it like that first couple of weeks of school?
Yeah, so we, the 5 of us pick a couple of dates in the summer to meet. Right after school, we make sure we have a meeting where we look at those core placement letters that we talked about and look at our incoming 5th graders. And we have like our step up meetings with the 3rd and 4th grade teachers who are sending us students. And we compile our core lists. So like the week after school, we'll know who we have in core the following year. And then we'll have another meeting in the summer just to go over curriculum stuff. But in the middle of summer, we'll also, within our core list, we know who doesn't have access to internet, who needs to have a phone call. So we come into school, make copies of what we send home for our summer mailing. And then for the new families, especially, each core teacher emails them individually, just welcoming them to Swift House, setting up that conference time. And again, if it's a family that we would already have known of based on the 3rd and 4th graders and what 3rd and 4th grade teachers and what they told us, then we'll make that phone call or make some sort of arrangement of getting in touch with them. Again, just to let them know about what Swift House is all about and welcome them to the family, set up those conferences. And then again, aligning with that those hopes and dreams conference happen about 2 to 3 days before school. And then the day before school, we have our mentors come in with the new 5th graders who they're mentoring. And we have a breakfast with just them. So it's just our mentors and mentees coming in for the breakfast. And we set up some interview questions and we play games so they can meet each core teacher. We do rotations with them. And that's really like their time of getting just acclimated to Swift House. They get to set up their cubbies first. They get to bring in their backpacks, and we show them where their what mailboxes are. So it's, we have, and I can share this, but a couple of things we send home in the summer are like the student profile sheet. And that explains our PLP process, and it has students and their families talk about where their strengths and challenges are in the different transferable skill areas. So they'll have something to bring to the table when we meet for that Hopes and Dreams conference. And then the whole backside of that sheet is just about them. So what are your hobbies and interests? What are you really good at? What do you want to get better at? What are some of your favorite things to do? And that's just that really important identity piece too. So that's all the information that goes out to families before the beginning of the school year.
Hey, Kev, I have a quick question on this. When
Yep.
you set up those hopes and dreams conferences before the school year, does your administration set aside time specifically so you can have those? Are you having those like after your professional development days and what have you?
You know, Don, I'm going to sound really naive here because I'm honestly not. I don't want to say no because I feel like there is time set aside for hopes and dreams conferences. But I'm so used to on Swift, we do all of our conferences outside of that allotted conference day,
Right.
because our conferences typically take 40 to 45 minutes per student. We each have about 25 of them. So I think we're so used to just setting up like 3 or 4 days before even that conference day would be. But I'm pretty sure we do. Our district, our administration does set up a hopes and dreams time the day before the first day of school.
So basically, if I'm hearing you correctly, just if I was going to implement something like this, I would say, okay, here's our first 3 days of professional development. After at 3 o'clock to whatever 6 o'clock, I'm going to try and bring in my incoming 7th graders and have those hopes and dreams conferences.
Exactly. Yeah. So we just work within those in-service schedules. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And Kev, are you the? I'm so sorry, Linz. I was just really quick. Kev? Are you the only team that does that, or do all the?
I think every team has their own version of it. I think again, I don't want to say something that's incorrect, but I know other teams definitely meet ahead of time. I'm not sure if other teams do like the mentor-mentee breakfast or have mentors and mentees like we have on Swift House. I think that's definitely something we bring to the table that is unique. But I do think there is some sort of hopes and dreams conference piece, whether it's just like a quick, like we just have, this 3-hour chunk and we just kind of get our families in during that time, or if it's more of these, like what we have our formal, like our first real kind of PLP conference is what it feels like. That's a little longer. So again, I don't want to say something that's incorrect to what other teams are doing, but I do know that other teams in Williston definitely do their own version of this.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that just like highlights the importance of team autonomy. That you don't necessarily need to know what other teams are doing. Swift has their own thing, and each team has their own autonomy. But I was just curious, Kevin, have you ever gone to like done a home conference for maybe families that can't make it in? Or I heard you say phone conferences, but I was just thinking about what are other ways to meet families,
Yeah. So when I was talking about the phone call, that's honestly like instead of the email. Sorry, I'm not moving enough. We might just call home just so they know, like, this is who your core teacher is going to be, and this is what what Swift is all about. Actually, my first conference ever as a teacher was a home conference where I visited the students' home with our guidance counselor, and that was my first experience with my own conference, and it happened to be a home conference, which was really powerful for me to experience off the bat. And it's one of those things where I think we're all committed to just we make it happen. We don't. It's not finding the time for it; it's making the time for it because it's really valuable, especially at the start of the school year.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's like a really strong example of the transition into middle school. Like, I think that there's a lot to learn from what your team does.
So I also had a follow-up question, Kevin, because you mentioned that your hopes and dreams are like a first PLP conference, and I'm wondering if the questions that you send out to the families and the kids are sort of the same questions that the kids are going to see when they're building the identity sections of their PLP. And if they are, how have you kind of designed that so when the kids are talking to you in the conference, then they come into the classroom, there's a common thread. What does that look like?
Everything's completely aligned. Those questions we're asking them about their hobbies and interests and what they like to get better at, those turn into, within the first 2 weeks of school when they're creating their identity pages, those kind of turn into what they're writing for their, or speaking. We let them choose whatever medium they want. But that's what they put on their identity page essentially. And then for the goal setting part, our hopes and dreams conference, each of our 5th graders leaves that conference with 5 goals that we've talked about. And again, it's the only difference from, I'd say it's like our first PLP conference. After that, all of our conferences are student led. Obviously, this one's, they're very nervous coming in, might be a little awkward. They don't know what to say. So it's more, teachers, parent, and just kind of asking students a lot of questions and just getting them comfortable with being in the space. But we just try to keep it as light as possible. So like, for instance, for the communication, students know they're going to have a communication goal, when we talk about their strengths around reading, their strengths around writing, speaking and listening, and what challenges they have with those areas. And then, we always bring it back to them, like, what would you like to get better at? And they might say, I want to be able to write a really good paper. It's like, great. So our goal is not to write a really good paper, but what are the underlying elements that are going to get you there? Like, I'm going to take some time to revise my writing. Awesome. Let's start with that for a goal. Like, I take time to revise and edit my writing. That might be a starting communication goal, which then actually would stay with them for a while. So that's kind of how we work backwards with our goal setting is, we let them think about what are your bigger goals. And then we say, okay, what are those skills, those underlying skills that you need to get there? And that's what we capture as their goal for the different transferable skill goals that we have.
Nice. Thank you very much. Lindsay, do you want to talk also some more about innovation? What are you seeing as some of the gaps in what schools are doing?
The gaps?
Or like you mentioned that a lot of us have spent this time, I guess Kevin just talked about, transitioning kids into our programs. A lot of our focus right now to start out the webinar was about how we're transitioning kids to the next life and learning stage. Are there other tools or strategies that you see that could be innovative or that we could be doing better in terms of the transitions?
Oh boy. I think that we just named some really innovative and important strategies. I think, I just think that sometimes, I think what Kevin said, like you said, not find the time, but we need to make the time, or well, you said.
Yeah, I said if it's that important, you need to make the time, not just find the time for it.
Exactly. So like, I know that like for educators, our summers are very short and precious, and there's a lot of things that we do during that time, but we need to be cognizant that we have our learners that are thinking daily about, maybe not daily, but for some daily about the transition back into school, and what that's going to feel like. So I think those like touch points in the summer, whether it's a letter or a postcard or a phone call or an email. When we always, I think many teams send home like a summer letter, like can't wait to see you from your advisor, or postcard. Those little extra pieces that do take time, but I think those are the things we need to be mindful of to make the time for, because it's going to alleviate a lot of the anxiety and stress that enters with all of us when we start a new school year, when we feel already that connection and sense of belonging to a community, whether it's like that. I like what Kevin was saying about that mentor breakfast and the fifth graders coming in. I thought that was great. And I think any kind of day where you can just like support. For us, it was always like, since I was in a 6, 7, 8 building for a while, it was about the locker that caused a lot of anxiety. So we would often meet kids throughout the summer to come in and just practice their lockers. Because really, that was the thing. We should just have cubbies. I like just going back to the cubby idea. But, that was like the cause of a lot of anxiety, was around, am I going to be able to open up a locker? So come on in and let's work on that a couple times this summer.
Right.
Yeah, I think that we had talked about this before.
I was just going to say, Linda.
Go ahead, Meg.
Super quick. I was just going to say that for many kids, getting that personal handwritten note from a kid is the only mail that they get, and that because mail is sort of this lost art, the art of handwritten note, I think speaks volumes about, hey, I'm taking the time to reach out to you during the summer to just let you know, hey, I just finished this great book, or if you know the kid, just making that personal connection, it goes a long way.
Yeah, and I just wanted to reference a conversation that Lindsay and Maura, and I think maybe all of us had last year, where we talked about how schools bring kids in from the summer and they drop them into these rigid schedules, and how jarring that can be for students, and why we're not having more soft openings. Like Kevin talked, or somebody mentioned these camps, like why we're not bringing kids in more like a summer camp where they get to go around and have maybe a condensed schedule and get to go to their lockers and get to sort of do the fun stuff and have that, instead of dropping them into this, okay, you're in language arts for this period or here for that period, why we're not kind of creating a camp atmosphere where they can come out of the summer and into the school year in a more balanced and healthy way, especially when you think about things like sleeping and eating. And, kids are going to be, their clock is going to be completely different. And so what are we doing at the beginning of the year to make them feel like it's a slow adjustment and not so sudden? And I really liked what Kevin was talking about, the alignment piece. And I mean, I'm sure this is, a lot of us do this already, but making sure, asking the questions in your summer letter that are going to help spur the thoughts that'll take place when you do get those kids in the classroom. I think that's really important. And just go ahead.
Sorry. I was going to add to that piece around the start is like, I've been thinking a lot about that piece. I think I shared this before about this like idea, this like slow foods movement, but the slow schools movement.
Mm-hmm.
Like we need to slow it down and be really mindful about our pace, just in general, because we like are at a frenetic pace in schools. And for what reason, I'm not sure. It's not it's not helping anybody, adults or young people. But like if you, just like you said, Don, like we start, like the slow foods movement was all about like really connecting to where your food's coming from, cooking and taking time to eat food and enjoy it with people, and that sense of connection. Like I feel like that could be a metaphor for the way that we need to think about our pace in schools in general, but then especially around the transition back, around that. I think we expect of all of us, adults and young people, that we're just going to like quickly readjust. Like you're on like, it's like jet lag. Like it's just going to take like 2 days, then you'll get used to it. And it's like, no, it's like actually takes a lot longer, and the pace is really frenetic. And we have such a short summer, and school starts in our summertime. And why are we not outside, like harvesting from the garden,
Right?
Going outside and just like learning outside. It's like pretty soon it's gonna be freezing and snowing. Let's do some stuff.
Let's harvest it. Yeah. We used to, so on Alpha, we would take the 8th graders in the first like 2 or 3 days of school out to an 8th grade leadership retreat, where we would just sort of pump them up about being in 8th grade and what are their hopes and dreams as a collective class around, what do they want to know at the end of the year? What do they want to see themselves when they graduate in May or in June? And how are you going to be intentional about your year? So we go to Oak Ledge and do a lot of team building stuff with them, but then they would set up an orientation for the 6th and 7th graders around, what is Alpha? What's the team? What are some terms that you need to know? What does it mean to be part of a community? And we go to Shell Beach and set up activities and games for them to do that. And that was always sort of the first 3 weeks, within the first 3 weeks of school. And it just like set the pace and this idea of like, we're in this together. And, down at the start, we had talked a little bit about, so how do we help teachers transition? I think just going through it right now, like how do we intentionally help teachers to come together to establish what their norms or what kind of environment that they want to be teaching in to help them model that for their students. What do we want to do for that? So I'm just super conscious of like that teacher, like as teachers, we're also transitioning, or some of us do it every year. We get a new group of kids every year and start green again. Some of us have the benefit of multiple years or multi-age. So that, there's just another lens to think about.
Yeah, I think too, Lindsay said something about this jarring start to the year. And what I think about is when a kid comes into a school, and maybe a kid who's not that comfortable or doesn't, enjoy school that much. And if they have a jarring experience or something happens that is, socially and emotionally difficult, how that can really influence their whole school year. Right. And what are the benefits of making sure that we're starting the school year in a kind of easy, not relaxed, but like a supportive way, and transitioning the kids back into the school so that physically, mentally, and socially they can feel good about the start of the school year. And I think that's something that's important that we should consider. And I also like this idea of pace, because I think what I'm teaching kind of a new unit right now, and I think the tendency is to throw as much in there as possible. But I think that pacing, slowing down a little bit and thinking about how we don't have to cover so much ground, but just cover it well, and making sure that we're taking the students' voices into account as much as possible. I just think those are really powerful ideas, especially as we're ending the year and then thinking about beginning the school year as well.
I also just want to add that because we obviously, the users of the system are our students, but also the adults. And I think Meg, you started mentioning that piece as well. Like, how many educators go back to their first day of school / in-service, and you're just like hit in the face with like 15 new initiatives, looking over all your papers. Like, what about if you started off with a retreat, or, like sharing a meal, and I know many schools do that where they, try to ease in and create community, but I mean, we think about that with our young people. Why are we not modeling that as adults and in our building?
These are all great points, people. And as usual, the longer we discuss them, the more great information comes out. It's about 4:15, and we're sort of wrapping it up. And I guess I'd just like to talk about if anybody has specific professional development opportunities that they want to highlight, maybe even in June or in the summer, things that they're looking forward to. One of the things that I'm looking forward to, obviously, is the Middle Grades Institute, which is happening June 24th, I think, to June 29th. And actually the 24th through the 28th, that's going to be at Champlain College. Looking forward to that. Also, I just want to mention the Vermont NEA is hosting a conference on Monday the 20th about safe schools, which is also interesting. And I don't know if anybody went to the Paul Gorski had a presentation yesterday, but we'll go Meg, Lindsay, and Kevin. What are some of the things that you're looking forward to, or activities or professional development that you think is important?
Yeah. Well, certainly just the wrapping up of the team is something I'm mindful of right now of Alpha, but I did plug in on our note, just the Scholar Leader Dinner is always a really lovely celebration of 8th graders. That's at the Plumley Armory at Norwich University, and that's on June 6th. Which is the next webinar, and I will be on the camping trip on that day, so I won't be here for that one. Just BT Debs.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Let's see. I think I was next. I would definitely, in thinking about the pace and taking care of ourselves, I would definitely highly recommend the Shelburne Farms Education for Sustainability programs. They really model what it is to like fully take care of yourself and take care of your students, take care of the land. Just a plug, Cultivating Pathways to Sustainability Year 4. We'll be setting out the save the dates for both the September, October date and the spring date. And we're hoping this year Shelburne Farms and Up for Learning are hoping to offer a partnership and a graduate course for the adults that are interested to continue this thread throughout the year. So stay tuned.
Awesome. Kevin?
Cool.
Yeah, just I'll echo what everybody else said about wrapping up with the end of the school year. And I know one of my colleagues and I are going to the Champlain Valley Educator Development Center workshop on standards-based learning and personalization. And that's a Monday, Tuesday of MGI. So if people aren't going to MGI, that's another option. So I'm looking forward to that and a couple other workshops.
Good. Well, again, thank you, everybody. Our last webinar is going to be actually on June 6th, as Meg mentioned. Thank you, everybody, for your great work and for taking the time out. I know it's a very busy time of year. I look forward to talking to everybody again in a month, some of you before that. And thank you very much to the Middle Grades Collaborative and the Tarrant Institute for sponsoring this work. And I hope you guys have a great day and a great weekend and a good Memorial Day weekend as well. I know that's coming up. Thank you very much, and have a good evening. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam.
Bye.